Hey everyone, welcome to AI Insights with me, Jonathan Blaber. I am the head of AI practice for Eden Smith. I've created this series of podcasts for business owners, leaders that are looking to adopt AI in one shape or form, but really, really important we do the knowledge sharing so that businesses don't make ultimately similar mistakes, but also businesses maximize ROI. So on today's episode, I've got someone who has a really, really strong background in consulting for sure, who's led departments at places like IBM, Accenture, KPMG, and has a wealth of knowledge to share, certainly around transformation and certainly recently within AI transformation. So I'm really, really excited to announce our guest, Hugo Pinto. Hugo, welcome to AI Insights. Hope you're
Thank
well.
you. Yeah, very well. Thank you. It's always good to talk about this, but it's even better to do it in good company.
Thanks, you're too kind. Me and Hugo, we actually met online, a few months ago now, I believe, and
Yeah.
we met at one of Eden Smith's data leader lounge, which was a really good success. Did you enjoy yourself, by the way?
Yeah, quite a lot. Quite a lot of colleagues and peers from the industry as well, which is always a great sign.
Yeah, good. So, Hugo, I always like to start these kind of conversations with just an insight on you, really, and where you've come from and where you are now. What's the journey been?
Yeah, the journey has been a little bit like the evolution of AI, right? A little bit random at times, but always chasing North Star, right? And I think from the beginning of my career, I wanted to do things that were slightly ahead of where the industry was. And so, having studied marketing and business strategy, and then starting to work in the advertising industry, very quickly, online became a dominant force in everything that I was doing on a daily basis. And this is going back over 20 years. But I guess I progressed through to the digital phase, got my hands on with technology, integrating digital solutions into company systems and companies' processes, driving impact. And that has essentially been sort of guiding my career up until now, and it still is. A few key things to highlight was first my big first encounter with AI and machine learning back in 2012, working for Telefonica as they were spinning off a few businesses. One of them a data commercialization business, and that was definitely a key milestone in my career. And definitely with AI. The second big milestone was transition into consulting, right? And that gave me a vantage point across all industries of what are the things beyond the technology and beyond the business that we typically think are an afterthought, but do need to be strategized against, do need to have frameworks and principles to drive them. And that's been the core of the past 10 years of experience. And like you said, the likes of IBM, KPMG, Accenture, with almost like a parallel, let's say Google 20% time investment in, working with startups, working with investors, working with smaller companies, trying to make the technology work for them. And again, I think that's a tremendous vantage point that gives you both sides of the story. In the past 2 years, we've witnessed another sort of meteoric change in terms of change. And I guess that's why we're having this conversation. It's because the impact is such already, even though we're just scratching the surface. There is a lot of change that is going to hit markets in the next 5 to 10 years, right? And that's very exciting.
100%. But the thing that really, I'm sure you get asked this question a lot. I ask this question a lot. Why aren't companies adopting AI right now?
That's a big question. So do we have 90 minutes? No, I'm kidding. I'll summarize. I'll get an LLM to summarize the answer.
But, yeah, I love that. Yeah.
So think about the different dimensions that need to be in place for companies to be successful in this. And let's learn from recent experiences. Let's call them experiences without saying if they were positive or negative. Something as simple as digital transformation has been going on in some of these companies for over 10 years, right? And digital transformation, I think originally and at its core, it's about moving systems into the cloud, into real time, into people having access to data and information at the tip of their fingers, and then starting to reshape the way they do things, right? Now think that in the past 2 years alone, there have been changes that might have a 10x type impact in terms of how these new processes are done, which means you almost need like a new digital transformation to adopt these types of technologies. The second thing I'll call out is whereas some technologies were designed to replace existing tools, which means you had a change in how you did a process, but the change was just the type of tool you use, then roughly an incremental improvement in terms of performance. But think about actually stop doing 90% of all of you do today and refocus that 90% of time in what you did 10% of your time with entirely new tools, right? And this is where it becomes really interesting, because new tools don't require you to have technical skills or backgrounds, which means companies have to adjust quicker than workforces. But also on top of the workforces, there is the technology that keeps on evolving even more dramatically. And even though I think we're at a stage where, you know, GenAI and LLMs are sort of reaching sort of a plateau in terms of evolution and capability, it's going to take quite a while for companies to get to a stage in which leadership is comfortable to making decisions to adopt these technologies, and teams are actually comfortable to accept that once again they will need to change. And essentially that's going to mean reprioritizing very big structural projects with a lot of investment behind them, and some of them with multi-year plans that needed to get the board and sometimes investors behind them. So I guess the mechanisms of decision making in large enterprises are not as agile as the wave of disruption that this technology allows companies to adopt them. And this means, you know, there are companies that will make the bold decision of changing the way they make decisions at a very high level. And there are companies that are going to take a little bit longer. And there is a real risk of getting left behind. And again, it's not just generic FOMO for companies. It is the truth of, you know, I've worked with people in big organizations in which after they did half a day in taking one process, running it through sort of an ideation session, and then building a solution themselves without knowing how to code, without producing a single line of Python, without even having to deal with any algorithms, they actually build a tool that automatically removes 50% of their workload, right?
Wow.
So there's a lot of catching up to do. The final one, and then I promise I will shut up, is about the culture, right? The culture of people adopting these tools and accepting there are things where they have been the most knowledgeable person in a firm doing something because they did it repetitively for a long time, and suddenly their time no longer needs to be invested in that, right? And mentally, I think this requires a lot of attention, because especially with all of the disinformation about what the technology is and what it will potentially do to people or humanity, which is complete BS. I think that area needs a lot of support, right? Because it is stressful and it is challenging.
Yeah, I think a lot of businesses, you know, that there's so many spinning plates to, you know, AI to, yeah, I guess it's like risk versus reward, right? You know, like
Always is.
how much do I invest? Am I going to get an ROI? Am I going to fail this miserably? You know, there's so many, yeah, moving parts to think about.
Yeah.
But you know, I think the great thing about today is you're actually going to share, you know, a previous case study of an AI implementation. And I think that's really important for business owners to understand, that there are some successes here early on. And I actually can't believe you mentioned a moment at the start that you were involved since 2012 with tele. I mean, I was unaware, AI was kind of a concept back then. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, back then it was machine learning, right? That
Yeah, of
was the
course.
theme. But back then, and I remember at Telefonica, we had a team, I don't know, 30, 40 data scientists.
Oh, wow.
So, which is funny to think that nowadays you probably need 10% of that number to start building something significant, right? But because the big paradigm shift with the advent of ChatGPT and what OpenAI released upon the world was democratizing a technology that is extremely developed into the hands of people that no longer need to have technical skills. They just need to ask the right questions and have the
Mm-hmm.
right sense of curiosity to then explore what are the things they need to do, right? Yeah, so again, this is a topic where we could spend a lot of time.
I guess managing 40 data scientists could have been interesting.
Yes, most
Yeah, I
of the
bet
time.
a lot of knowledge in the room, I'm sure. So
Yeah,
that's
no,
good.
again, I think it's like any of the expert stakeholders you need in a team to make this successful, right? If you close all of the similar profiles in a room, you get an echo chamber. If you get all of the different profiles split into teams in different rooms and then bring the rooms together, you get an amount of noise, but you also get an amount of very good ideas that have been validated from all of those dimensions, right? And again, this speaks to that cultural challenge a bit because companies are still very siloed, even though many of them have tried to break those silos. It takes time, and it takes a real mandate and a real enforcement with
Yeah.
proper incentives, right?
Sure. It's such
Yeah,
a big change, isn't it? So
yeah, it is.
absolutely. But look, let's not delay this intro on the case study. I'm really keen to hear about.
Yeah.
So I'd love to know I guess a good place to start is the problem, the challenge, and
Yeah.
ideally the solution.
Yeah. So I'll start off by first of all, we're going to sort of be looking at this sort of journey at a 10,000 feet height, right?
Of
There's a
course.
lot of detail that again, that would be multiple episodes required to cover all of it, and a number of different people to talk to each of
Of
those
course.
specialties as well, right? But essentially, the challenge was a company that I've worked with this past year that had been developing data platform technologies for regulated industry, and when ChatGPT was released, the founder and some of the leadership team sort of saw a real opportunity. If they'd spent almost 4 years, and out of curiosity, I worked with them when they were being set up, so it was really great to come back and see how much progress has happened. So if they'd spent all of that time curating that data and having a proper gold standard data set to work with, it sort of made their task of assessing and testing the value of deploying GenAI to build solutions backed by GenAI and really sort of get a good feel of what the impact was. And so they did, and they spent most of 2023 experimenting with the technology, building the first sort of let's say frameworks and almost like the core architecture to start building products. In the beginning of this year, they just sort of found a good, successful formula. They needed to go to market, right? And so I joined the team to help them figure out what's the value for companies, how do we take it to market in a consistent way, and how do we position it in the paradigm of what companies are already doing in their own internal data science teams. And also everyone's been experimenting with, even if it's ChatGPT licenses or Microsoft Copilot. One of these two you've probably had in your hands if you work for a big corporate over the past year. So So it was very interesting that initially the first key step was, okay, let's start validating what are the problems that we're solving. And I think that was one of the things that you sort of called out. That validation is actually a good exercise to start bringing people towards your side, to start making that cultural awareness and acceptance in. So with each of our target clients, what we typically did is let's have an engagement. Let's start with some learning, some training for the teams, and not just buyers or leadership teams or technical teams. Let's start building a good array of stakeholders, including business leaders and people that actually do this every day, which will then be our SMEs, and they will be our guides throughout the whole process. And in that, there were a few frameworks that we had to develop. We had to figure out, what was the information that you needed beyond that problem that needs to be solved. And obviously, the key thing is data, right? But what data is relevant to collect? What data is relevant to start mapping? And we helped them understand what were the samples pertaining that problem, what were the different formats of those samples, and then sort of mapping where that data was coming from and what it was going to be used for, right? And that then leads into, now we've analyzed the inputs. What are the outputs? What do they need to be, right? What is the gold standard of a good output? So imagine if you have a question to validate, to identify risk in a specific operation. What is the gold standard of that risk identification? When you identify risks, what is the type of evidence that you see? And so if you have that training information, you can now teach the system what it should look for. But if you also feed it what the right template is, then you're also going to help it understand what format does it need to output those findings in. And then finally, mapping, where does this need to be shown? Is it inside a system, let's say a CRM platform? Is it a dashboard with data that people can interact with? Or is it just your traditional, chatbot and you get an answer, or you get a piece of data or evidence and you can query it? How did you arrive to this solution, et cetera, et cetera. But all of this needs to be mapped end to end in every process, right? So it's heavy involvement. It requires knowledge about adjacent things like methodologies, regulation, et cetera. And it's funny that so far regulated industries have sort of operated at the margin with the excuse of, no, only we know our industry and the pain of navigating all of that.
Yeah.
And suddenly you have a very efficient tool. And I will just highlight, and I'll do this many times during our conversation. This is not something that tells you or knows the truth. It doesn't know what 100% is, right? It's a probabilistic tool, which means it gives you with ranges of certainty what the answer is probably for that specific question. But it's very quick to get to 70, 80% of a good question. That alone is a huge help for someone that's doing this, right? So what do you get out of all of this? Because many people might be thinking, well, that sounds like journey mapping, that sounds like data requirements, that sounds like data mapping. Well, the interesting thing is, one of the things that we knew back then is we need to switch some of the development cycle that typically companies do, which is, let's get some requirements in and documented, let's build a solution, let's have sign off, let's identify success and KPIs, and then let's start building, right? And then somewhere in the company, there would be an R&D team, typically locked in a basement, looking at what is the art of the possible. And then at some stage, you need to bring these two things together. The problem is these two teams typically speak very different languages, right? And you think of innovation and R&D teams, and they think about could a lot, right? It could do this, it could do that. We could build it this way, we could scale it that way. Whereas the delivery team thinks about can and does. What does it do? What is built? And we're almost like stuck in this chicken and egg. So the key thing to do that we very quickly started doing was we need to run almost like an R&D sprint very early on.
Okay.
So as soon as we know all of this, we need to validate, you know, which of these components can be solved with the help of an LLM? What makes a valid specific application of an LLM? And for that, actually, we defined, and I defined, a specific framework to identify them with basic questions everyone can understand, right? Is there anything where we're reading and extracting information out of hundreds or thousands of documents that have a standardized template? Imagine a contract, right? And second one is there any need to actually create a summarization of something that has 30 pages into, you know, one paragraph? And what are the highlights that you need to include in that paragraph? The other one, very popular right now in content repurposing, is I have one piece of content and I need to generate 10 different versions for 10 different stakeholders with different seniority levels in different parts of the ecosystem, but the core content is the same. The other one is interpretation, right? I need to be able to read a text and I need to interpret and see, has any law been broken? Is there a risk of something that has been highlighted here? And then finally is almost like the human element of training. If you have a trainee, the benefit of them sitting next to you as you're doing something end to end is they get to ask you questions of, why did you do it like that? What is missing here? Can you review what I've done? Is there anything I could have done better? And now you almost have a technology that can, again, do 70, 80% of all of this querying. So all of these, and these are all almost like steps in the middle of a bigger process. In all of these things, you can actually throw an LLM on it. And with that data that I mentioned earlier, to understand all of the different components of this, then we can start making specific decisions around how to design that solution, right? And that is it the right option to use an LLM on this? But then other questions. Are we going to build everything? Or are we going to use things that are already being used in the market and in the industry, right? And this is where the concept of modularity comes in, because are we really going to use LLM tokens to do the whole sequence of the process? And strategically, we started looking at the agentic strategies of that today everyone talks about. It's agents for everything, right? But agents and components were back then not as abundant to do everything that we needed to do. For instance, fact checking or web scraping or maths and calculations or data visualization or even time series analysis. So back then already that modularity was something in our minds. And finally, if it sort of goes through all of these barriers, what is the right prompting approach, right? How do we prompt for it, and how do we fine tune those prompts to get the right output and the accurate output, right? So this is almost like the beginning of that journey, right? It's doing the right thing, it's doing it right, and doing it efficiently as well.
Sure. Thank you so much for that overview. You went into a lot of detail there as well, which a lot of our audience will I'm sure resonate with as well. What was, you know, is there any specific outcomes you can talk about here? Any like successes from that? I mean, I appreciate, you know, we don't need to go into to full disclosure, but
yeah. So I think I'll mention 3 types of success here, right? Because there's the direct one, but there are the ancillary ones as well, which might be even more relevant. And one of them is the ability to very quickly produce working code and a prototype that you can put in the hands of users and test it, right? And back then, it was still, you know, weeks or a few months to be able to do that. But still, that was very quick. So the ability to take a file from one of the SMEs, run it through the first iteration of the system, automatically have that data that sometimes took literally weeks of work of a team of people, and automatically plot it into a format that you could then import it into an Excel spreadsheet. I mean, that's simple. Not really that
Wow.
fancy, but that alone is already shaving weeks in terms of effort and cost, right? That's number one. And to be honest, it almost looks like magic, right?
I can
For
imagine.
for people that have been, reading a big PDF and copy pasting information into an Excel sheet that then has a set of templated calculations that automatically produce a report. Well, first of all, it's prone to human error, right?
Of course.
Secondly, someone needs to verify that actually step by step. So the verification is almost as big as the effort itself. And three, in any activity, specific individuals are part of a team because they tend to specialize in different aspects of that same bit of the operation. So having a system that can look at all of the different angles, it's tremendous, right? Again, with all of its flaws and the things that need to be worked on. This is the first output. Second one is there was a clear realization around what are the structures that we need to have around this to make this work, right? What's the shape of the team? What's the type of governance that you need to have to make sure that you're doing the right thing, you're prioritizing the right thing, not for the sake of science or technology, but for the sake of the business, right? Then how does the interaction with the remaining stakeholders work? Because if initially we thought AI is going to take over some of the programs, I think the big finding is AI is going to augment in different impact and size all of the different programs going on in any company at any time, right? The third one, which for me is probably the most paradoxical, is the fact that there are very big challenges, and those are not technical challenges. So annoyingly to typically the technical people that work in my teams, I say technology is the easy part, right? Because it is a finite set of resources you have and a finite capability that the technology has. What is very difficult to change is what if your commercial model is charging by volume, by the minute, by the hour, by the click, and suddenly
Yep.
you have a technology that is able to transcend that as a barrier and can deliver what you needed, armies of people being billed to clients with a technology that allows to do it better and faster, right? So there's a big commercial sort of paradigm shift that companies need to change. The other one is if these products are built right, you are going to be able to measure the impact and the outcome for that business, right? But it's difficult. Again, we come back to culture of a conservative type approach to business development, more focused on how have we made money and generated value so far, to we need to get some skin in the game and actually put some, if not most, of your revenue against outcomes, which funnily enough, again, is the opportunity for companies to be real participants of the success of their clients, right? But at the same time, just like you said in the beginning, right, it's that trade-off between risk and reward.
100%. But I can imagine there's, business owners listening here and thinking, you know what, it sounds great, but I'm not entirely sure I'm going to get the buy-in from everyone, which I'm sure must be a huge challenge. Do you encounter that a lot? Is there any tips that you can offer to get everyone on board?
Yeah, I'm a believer of everyone needs to have their light bulb moment, and different people have different ways of generating that light bulb moment. What I've seen of running literally hundreds of workshops with very senior C-suites and boards, as well as executioners, field forces, etc., is showing them the potential very quickly and then giving them the opportunity for them to come up with their own ideas. And it's quite fascinating because specifically on GenAI, it's removed the need for me to teach people how to use advanced tools. And I can just have a conversation, showcase a few of the tools that I use on a daily basis. And then 15 to 20 minutes, they've broken down a problem into steps. And they're actually coding with LLMs without the need to code. They're just dragging boxes, creating connectors, typing text to bring to life that logic. So very quickly they start seeing, well, if all I have to do is give the parameters that I use to make a decision to transform A into B, I don't need to focus on this anymore, right? What I really want to focus is on C, because C is the thing I never have time to do, and supposedly it's my job title, but I'm always stuck at trying to fix the basics.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The sentence that comes to mind is a CFO I worked with a few years back, and he said, it took me 10 years to get people to use Excel, and I suspect it's going to take another 10 to get them out of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a huge change, right, and a huge impact. But I honestly, I'm genuinely fascinated by that and by your experience, your knowledge. I think you've got so much to offer for sure. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom on AI insights. Wishing you all of the best for the future. This is Hugo Pinto. It's a round of applause, Hugo. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
This is AI Insights with Jonathan Blaber. Thanks for listening to another episode of AI Insights with me, Jonathan Blaber, heading up our AI recruitment practice at Eden Smith. Now, if you like what you've heard today, please visit our website, find me on LinkedIn, or email me at jonathan.blaber@edensmith.co.uk. Thanks again for listening.